welcome to the Healing Half. My name is Mickey Spear. I am joined by the wonderful Chris Yaw. And am I pronouncing that correctly, Chris?
You are, Mickey. That's exactly right.
Okay, awesome. And tonight, you guys, we are going to be diving into a really important topic about guilt after grief, or guilt with grief and guilt with loss, and especially in the sense of accidental impacts, which I'm going to allow Chris to talk all about here in just a second to share his story and to dive in a little bit deeper. But for those of you who are just joining us live, welcome. This is the Healing Half, where we take 30 minutes or less to dive into how we can heal our own wounds and as well as help others with theirs. And I've got Chris on a call here real quick, so we're going to just dive right on in while I've got him. So Chris, thank you so much for being here. Do you mind just giving a little introduction to yourself and sharing your story?
Well, sure, Mickey. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, and thank you for the good that you're doing in the world. I think the title of your show, The Healing Half, is just taking for granted the fact that none of us are perfect and that we are all moving towards health. And what we need is a compassionate world to help us do that, not a judgmental, retributive world, world full of vengeance, but one that's going to really hold us in compassion. So thank you for having me. Thanks for the good work that you're doing. I'm Chris Yaw, and among other things, I'm an accidental killer. And that means that 13 years ago this month, I accidentally took a life. And I'm one of 30 to 40,000 people every year, Americans, who do this. That does not include people who accidentally harm. I was talking yesterday with a man who was driving 13 years ago, and he got into an accident, and his son is now quadriplegic. And so every day he lives through, he went from his son's soccer and softball coach to a guy who's, wheeling him around. And so accidental harm is even much greater than accidental killing. We often think of accidental killing, especially when it involves drinking or texting or something illegal, as, oh, okay, there's the victim, and then there's that guileless perpetrator who should be locked up forever, without thinking that, most everybody, when they harm somebody, feels a deep sense of regret and loss. And I think that our world is becoming more compassionate, more understanding. I see that in my lifetime as I've seen the rise of LGBTQ A plus rights, and the recognition we have of people who are different and people who suffer in many ways. So I'm happy to see this issue. I think there's a little bit more compassion on this issue than there has been in the past. But my story is that I accidentally took a life, and I went looking for others who had done the same thing or writing on the subject, and really didn't find anything until I was reading the New Yorker magazine, and there was an article about a woman named Marianne Gray, who had founded a website called Accidental Impacts. It's accidentalimpacts.org. And she's a psychologist from Los Angeles, retired now from UCLA. And she accidentally took a life when she was 22. She's retired now, and there's not a day in her life that's gone by when she hasn't thought of Brian, who, when he was 8 years old, ran in front of her car. As a graduate student, she was going to the beach. And next thing she knew, there was a boom. Totally not her fault, never charged, never ticketed. But this is a pain that has plagued her. She never had kids as a result. She's gone through a lot of pain and suffering as a result of that accident. And so I read about her. I went to her website. We immediately became fast friends. I started blogging for her. And about 4 years later, we decided we'd start a foundation. And so we started the Accidental Impacts Foundation a few years ago. And then during COVID, we decided, there's a community building up here. We're going to start inviting people to come once a month to a support group. And so just yesterday, we had our November support group, which brought together 40 people from different countries and continents, but all with one thing in common. And Mickey, there's not a meeting that goes by when at least one person doesn't say something to the effect of, I took a life 35 years ago, and this is the first time I'm talking about it. Because this is such a shameful, guilt-ridden event in a person's life. And so after the Alec Baldwin incident recently, we were contacted and were featured in a number of different medium. I appeared on Inside Edition not too long ago, and during this Alec Baldwin thing, and a friend of mine calls me and says, "I just saw you on Inside Edition. I didn't know that you killed somebody." And I said, "Well, it's not something I really broadcast," which of course now I do, but it's not like you walk into a cocktail party and you talk about. So it's really one of these things that is the secret. And
Mm,
those of your listeners who are in 12 step, there are a lot of sayings that they have, and one is, "You are as sick as your secrets." And so
mm.
it's really important for those who have gone through a trauma like this to be able to have a safe space to talk about it, to process it, and to we don't really talk about healing, Mickey, because when you take a life, it's not like you get over that. But what we talk about is coping, and how can we cope? How can we go on? And how can we, put together the tools we need to do the work that we need to do?
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Chris. And I am so, so grateful for you to be on the show to be able to, like you said, talk about this topic that has up
Yeah,
to this point been widely
yeah,
judged and widely kind of like, well, it must have been their fault. Because, and it's just, it's so hard to wrestle with and accept the fact that sometimes accidents happen and that they
yeah,
are massively impactful in the worst of ways. So I'm so grateful for you.
yeah,
And you kind of talked about guilt and shame. And I
yeah.
can't even imagine. I read Marianne's article too. And when she
Hmm.
talked about how she just had to sit next to the car with this wailing mom of the boy she accidentally ran over, I couldn't even like, that's almost unfathomable. But obviously there's so many people out there who do identify like that, like you said, whether it's a death kill
Yeah.
accident or they accidentally hurt somebody where their victim's life has changed. So can you dive a little bit into
Hmm.
what guilt looks like and maybe some of the stuff that you guys talk about on how to cope with that guilt?
Well, sure. One of the first things we invite people to do is to seek therapy. And that is a big, big help when you talk to our membership. Um, they will talk about how helpful most people are with therapy. Not everybody, but that you realize that it's trauma, and um, when we experience trauma, it's basically the three F's: friends, family, and faith are tend to be what can bring you through these things, and to also understand that it's it you know it, time does have a healing aspect to it, and that the feelings that you're feeling now are probably going to be temporary. um, they're probably going to return at times, but most people do get over this, and most people do find healthy ways to cope. um, excuse me. And so when we talk about guilt, we can talk about it on a continuum. Do I feel guilty? Absolutely. It was, this was an accident um, that I hold some, some sense of responsibility. And let me take a sidetrack here. When we talk about accidental killing and we define an accidental killer, you have to have three criteria met. One is that you have to be involved in an accident in which somebody died. Secondly, it has to be an accident. It wasn't done on purpose. And third, you have to feel a sense of responsibility. And a lot of people have trouble with that because, in Marianne's case, for example, little 8-year-old Brian ran in front of her car. And people will very often say to an accidental killer, um, shake it off. It wasn't your fault. The kid ran in front of your car. There's no police charges, and he's holding you accountable. But that is not how we're wired. Humans are wired to love, and humans are wired to care. And when they're not, we call them psychopaths, right? We know their wiring is wrong. Um, but the fact that so many people feel guilty about what they've done is actually a sign of health. It's actually a sign that you have feeling and you care, and that you want to do better. So I think it's important to look at the positive side of guilt. It means you're human. It means that you care about other people. I personally believe that which is deepest within you is good. Um, you are not, a hopeless, horrible sinner, and that's all you're destined to do. Um, but that you are in fact somebody who is capable of doing a lot of good and bring a lot of good into the world. And it's finding ways to connect with that. So how we deal with guilt therapy is important. Um, various techniques that you can pick up at therapy on ways to um, dominate your thinking on the positive and not on the negative are really important. I'm not a therapist, but it does depend on where you are in the continuum and what's going to be effective for you.
That is so helpful, and I'm so grateful that you kind of, like you said, like that continuum and like allowing ourselves to be on a flowing thing where
Yeah,
some days it might be stronger and some days it might be weaker, and to just accept that. And I loved how
yeah,
you reframed guilt, which is, and again, there's a lot more to it, but then to say
yeah.
like you're feeling. So in regards to that, I mean, obviously, if you've accidentally killed somebody, there's a lot of people behind that victim. This is kind of going just like a little bit different direction,
Yeah.
but do you find a lot of people find healing in connecting with like their family of the victim, or like how does that work?
Well, in that gets really tenuous because what I think we want more than anything is we want as good a situation as possible to come out of the tragedy, right? And there are instances in which my friend Mark, for example, he got drunk and drove with his fiance and killed her, and he is still really good friends with his fiance's dad. And
Wow.
he calls even though it's been years. He got remarried and married somebody. He still calls his fiance's fiance that he killed, her dad, his father-in-law. And so he has obviously an unbelievable relationship with him. And yet you can go to the other side of the spectrum and find that the people involved in your accidental death don't want to have a thing to do with you, because you bring up bad memories, you darken their day, and you just have to live with that. I'm in my case, that's more of where things are. And so for me to reach out and say, hey, let's have some sort of relationship, it's not going to be helpful for them. They're not going to look forward to it, invite me over for Thanksgiving. And that's probably, the case for most of these. We're talking tragedy. This is awful. This is a horrible thing. I always I like to say we're members of a club that nobody wants to join, and that nobody here wanted to join. Um, it's a tragedy. But you and I talked in the pre-interview, Mickey, about guilt and about this idea that guilt is very, very often related to things that have happened in the past, and that it's very important for us to realize. And I like to use the analogy of a car. And when engineers design a car, um, they design the windshield to be real big so you can see everything, and they design these little mirrors that are up in the corner of your eye here, and then maybe one on the right, one on the left door, that are rear view mirrors. And the idea is to never make the rear view mirror the windshield, because
Mm.
that's what guilt tries to make you do. Look into the past and live in the past and drive as if you were in the past. And that's not what we're supposed to do. We have that big windshield. There's a whole big life ahead of us. We've been given certain gifts that nobody has. We bring love and light into situations that nobody else can do. And to really find ways to shrink those rear view mirrors that will be giving us those stories of, oh, you're guilty, you're worthless, you're, all those negative things that we all experience, is really, really important.
I love that metaphor about the bigger it's a windshield, and then there's a little bit of
Hmm.
retrospect.
Hmm.
And to the person listening, let's say, whether it's an accidental impact like what you had, or it's an accidental killing, or I know a lot
Yeah.
of people who, after a suicide, they feel so guilty because they didn't recognize
Oh
the
yeah.
signs, they didn't do all that
Hmm.
stuff.
Oh yeah.
How do you guys work in moving forward? And I just feel like a lot of people are stuck in that guilt sense that they just can't let it go. They can't forgive themselves. And they sometimes say, I wish it was me instead. Do you
Oh
have
yeah.
any
Yeah.
kind of words of, if you were talking to somebody who's just trapped in their guilt, especially if it's their own child, or whatever it is, whether it's a death or an
Yeah.
injury
No,
or
no, honey.
missing it, what would you say to that person who's
Well,
really struggling with guilt?
I do say that if it is something that dominating in terms of your life, I mean, if your thoughts, you can't work, you can't sleep, definitely go see a therapist who will be able to give you coping strategies and ways to move past that. Um, you know, phone a friend. I mean, that is the age old go to that's so helpful for us. Somebody's going to listen to you and care about you. Because what we really want to be told is that uh, it stinks. It's horrible to have witnessed or to been a part of what you're a part of. The second thing is we want to be told that we're cared for, and if it's appropriate, that I love you or I like you. And then the third thing is that I'm here for you. Those are the three big things that we and as humans, we don't like to be around people who are suffering. So what do we try to do? We try to fix it, and we try to say, "Oh, God had a plan. Oh, he's in a better place. Oh, think of all you're going to learn from this." And we go down the litany of these basically banal kind of potions we like to give people because we feel uncomfortable with their pain. Um, and I feel uncomfortable being in the presence of people who are suffering like that too. But that's not helpful. What's helpful is to be there with them, to name it, to say, yes, this really stinks. Don't try to fix it because you can't. When you take a life or are part of a situation like that, there's a hole there that ain't going to be filled. You are a different person. But the irony of this is that very often it's these tragedies and these horrible things that we've been through that make us the empathetic, kind, understanding, compassionate people we are. So that's
Mm.
really the funny thing that happens as a result here. Because you don't become compassionate until you are in the operating room and the person died, or you were an accidental harmer. We call them in our kind of group, we call them caddies, CADI, meaning causing accidental death or injury.
Mm.
And so
Okay.
that then also encompasses. You want me to put you on my shoulders? Hold on a sec. I have to put a 2-year-old on my shoulders here.
That's okay.
Is
No
that okay?
worries.
Okay. Come
Yeah.
on, Jack. There we go.
We'll see what Jack has to say about this. He can be
Yeah,
interviewed.
there you
Hey,
go.
Jack.
There he
Cute.
is.
Oh,
Uh,
so sweet. No, I am so grateful for your time. And I guess kind of the last question is you mentioned faith earlier, and I know you are a reverend. Do you mind just kind of quickly highlighting how faith fits into this? And dare I say faith and forgiveness fit into all this?
yeah, I think it's really important to bring up, and I do want to be mindful of those for whom faith is not a substantial source of succor, as you would say, of a nurturing sense of feeling at peace. But yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian an Episcopal priest, and this notion that we live into as people of faith is one in which there is a God who is defined biblically as love, so that God is love, and therefore love incarnate is this person we call Jesus. And when we look at the life of Jesus, we see how love operates in the flesh, like you and me. We say incarnation is what we call this act in which God became human, and we've had chili con carne, and that means chili with meat. And so this is God with meat walking around, and what does that look like? Well, they're engaged primarily in healing, in justice making, in feeding, in nurturing. This is what God does when God is here. Is God takes care of other people and heals and forgives. 2 Corinthians 5 talks about the ministry of Christians as being reconciliation, and so our job being to fix what's broken, to reconcile opposing parts. And so when I look at this kind of idea of this is who God is wanting healing, and is working to bring about healing. That this really helps me understand then that okay, there's a force out there that's concerned with my health and with me being restored. My Christian faith uh, helps me really understand that I am then a child of love, and that
Mm.
I have at my core loving sense and this mission to go out and help love the world and bring the world into greater places of health and wholeness. And so I really, I really think that that gives me a lot in terms of my sense of purpose. You know, because that's what we talk about. Who are you and why are you here? Who am I? I'm a person created out of love. I live my best life when I love, and I'm destined for love. That's who I am. And then, what am I here to do? I'm here to engage in this ongoing ministry of restoring the world, of making the world better than it was when I got here. And it's exciting to study history and see how, you know, we are feeding more people. There are fewer people killing each other. There are fewer people dying in wars and of violence. You know, there's this wonderful kind of arc to history that's showing us that there is restoration and healing. And don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to do, but this really helps me in my healing. That there's a purpose as to why I'm here and to what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if that's helpful.
It's entirely helpful, and I am so grateful. So thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, for all the support that you are giving other people who are hurting. I am so grateful for you, and I will let you and Jack have a really fun rest of your morning together, or evening together.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Nikki.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Okay, Mickey. Bye bye.
Well, you guys, what did you think about that? I know for me personally, as I'm kind of going through all the stuff that Chris talked about, my heart and my empathy muscle is just cringing at the thought of that, again, that Marianne Gray story, which if you are not on my email list, I will make sure I loop that in because it's a really good article that just highlights her story. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think all of us, because we're human, we almost, it's like my back hurts and I want to just like cringe and shake at the thought of accidentally hurting somebody. And what's is seemingly unthinkable for me is the reality for somebody else. I know a lot of you who are listening feel a lot of guilt surrounding the loss of your loved one. And whether it was an accidental killing, which I know is a pretty extreme situation, there's a lot of guilt in a lot of death. So what I wanted to do is we kind of wrap up this episode, and then of course I'll talk a little bit about going forward and kind of what you can expect for the next couple of weeks here. Is I want to just highlight some examples of how guilt can look for not in a catty situation, you know, where he's talking about not an accidental death or injury. Couple things that come immediately to mind. There's going to be 4 that I'm going to cover. The first one is with suicide, and I could do a whole other episode on suicide. As for those of you guys who don't know, my brother-in-law Brendan passed away of suicide in 2015, actually on the same day my mom died, but she died several years earlier. So March 15th is a hard day for the Sir and the Spear families. And I just know from his story and all the people that were affected by it, but this is so true for almost any suicide. And I would include drug overdoses and other things in this category too, where you just feel responsible and you feel like I should have seen it coming and I should have done X, Y, and Z to prevent it. And you just take on that guilt. And it's when you're talking about guilt, hypothetically, it's really easy to kind of have some of those like fluffier answers about like, oh, everything happens for a reason, blah, 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 blah. But when it's your loved one who is gone and your heart is hurting and you see the destruction of their loss all around you, it's not an easy feat to overcome. So I think that's the big thing that I want to like take away is we kind of talked in broad strokes about grief right now, about guilt right now. But remember, it is absolutely a journey and it is a hard journey to be on. So please give yourself grace as you are on that continuum. Like he talked about, some days you're going to feel a lot and other days you might not feel as much. And eventually, maybe, just maybe, you might get to a spot where you don't feel very much guilt at all, especially with awareness around a suicide where you kind of recognize like they are struggling, they've got mental illness, like all that stuff can kind of help hopefully take some of the pressure off of you. But that's just one way a lot of people feel guilt. So again, the whole mission of the show is how can we heal our own wounds and how can we help others with theirs? So if you know people who lost a loved one to a suicide, it's important to, if you are close enough to them, to check in and see how they're doing. And remember what Chris said about, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to just dismiss them. Be like, oh, well, they're in heaven now and everything happens for a reason. But just sit with them and let them process that. The second one, and I kind of touched on that earlier, would be anything like drug, alcohol related, where you feel like, again, whether it was on purpose overdose or an accidental overdose, you still have seen this person on this journey. And when they pass away, a lot of people feel so much guilt for just all those months leading up to it. And I think there's a great episode. My aunt Leanne came on and talked about kind of her experience with having a family member that she loves so deeply struggle, and then how hard it is not to feel responsible because you love them and you want change for them. So that's kind of a second thing to keep on our radar. The third one is a little bit more dependent on the situation, right? But if a doctor or a healthcare is involved, there can be a lot of guilt. And of course, all of these also have anger attached to them. But there can be a lot of guilt associated with not taking somebody to the doctor sooner or not taking them to the right doctor. I know with my mom, she had gone to doctors for months and months and months and months before they finally were like, okay, fine, let's do a colonoscopy. And then they found stage 4 cancer. And while I feel mostly angry about that, I know there have been other people that have felt guilty for not pushing the doctors harder on the front end, and for not saying, hey, do the test now, and kind of be up in their face, especially because our culture right now is kind of shaming people who are a little bit more aggressive. So of course, it's kind of trying to find the balance of not being a Karen, as the cool kids are saying, but then also advocating for yourself and saying, wait a second, like, this is my health, my future, like, I need more tests. And when we don't do that, we sometimes feel a lot of guilt. And then the last one would just be lifestyle. I know a lot of people who have spouses who die of lung cancer or of a heart attack or any obesity related illness can sometimes feel a lot of guilt around, I should have pushed them harder to quit. I should have cooked healthier meals. I should have gone walking with them. And it, not just obesity, it's just like really any old age thing that, a healthier body perhaps wouldn't have gone through. We can feel a lot of guilt. Like, why didn't I push I heard somebody whose dad died of a heart attack say, I should have confronted him about his eating habits, but I didn't. And now he's gone. And it's just like all this stuff that's really heavy. So again, for just examples, and I'm sure there are a lot more out there of ways that guilt can affect us after loss that have nothing to do with accidentally killing someone. So the last thing, you guys, as we wrap up, I just wanted to give you one more highlight reel. Don't forget that this live show is ending soon. We are going to have our last Kumbaya, our Christmas holiday celebration on the 21st. And I really hope that you join me. I'm going to be sending out Facebook invites. I'm going to be sending out a sheet ahead of time that you can actually print off and have ready to go for the show. And again, if you're on my email list, that will happen. That will just be sent to you automatically. But please, please, please invite your friends. This is a really quick, easy opportunity to pause. And even if they can't make it live, you could send them the replay link and say, hey, this would be great. And the reason why we want to do that is so then that way we can, if you imagine a balloon filled with pressure and it's about to pop, that is oftentimes what people who are grieving feel going into Christmas. They're so overwhelmed with emotions, and then the thought of, in one hand, getting to see a bunch of people, but on the other hand, having to see a bunch of people, it can just be so overwhelming. And their person that they lost isn't around anymore. And it's just so much, and it's building and building and building. When we take time to pause and just let some of the air out and actually acknowledge those feelings, that balloon can start to shrink. It can be a little bit more manageable. It's not to say the holidays are going to be a breeze and that you're not going to miss your loved one, but it can hopefully make it a smoother ride versus because you've spent time kind of defusing the bomb just ever so slightly. So I really do hope that you join us. And then after that point, I'm going to go on a little break. I haven't had a break from this show. I don't think I've missed a week for over a year and a half, which is really exciting. And I'm so honored that you've been a part of this journey with me this whole time. So I'm just going to take a couple weeks off, recoup, heal a little bit, just kind of get my vision ready, and then launch the podcast early, whether it's kind of Q1 of sorts, so early in Q1. But in the meantime, you guys, again, I cannot wait to see you on the 21st. I am so grateful for you, for this live show and everything that it has been and all the lives it has touched and all the messages I have learned from our amazing guests like the wonderful Chris Yao. So thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next week. Bye, guys.